assessment that you're using here is now one that's explicitly tied to your learning goals. So that's a huge step up. And what I'm getting at with this is the design of my course. What I like about part of what Ed's done is integrating the design of a course, the research on a course, what is it we know about students, and the assessment of where students are at with all of that, which so far now generally don't all happen in a course, and if they do, are certainly decoupled. I spend absolutely no attention to linking my assessments to my course instruction. And I'm one of the people who gives a shit.
You're a leading light in the world of science education.
And yet,
so
right?
What do you think
because
the
it's so
average
difficult to do
person's
that.
going to do?
Exactly, because I don't have a structure to help me link the assessments that I have overtly to say this question is getting at these 3 learning goals that I have in my particular course, which are tied to these lectures and these homework sets and the research on student learning in that way. I don't have a structure that provides that for me. The only structure that I have is me and my wisdom of practice and my history of being in the field.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't trying to replace you in all of the work you've done, but
I hope so. No.
Noah's saying it does a lot of work that he's not doing.
Right, exactly. That's my point, is it does a lot of work that I'm not doing, and certainly other people who care less about their class or know less about education don't do.
So I agree with that. I think my concern is the validity of the scheme that you're trusting.
Yes.
By using this tool.
all right. Well, I mean,
But there's no. But this tool has no. This tool has no. No judgment, which is maybe what you guys are criticizing. It has no judgment about what the national standards are. It has no judgment about the notion of assessment instruments. And now you said that there's this ranking system that comes
What do you
in.
mean it has no judgment?
You can put in any kind of framework that you want about what does it mean to know biology.
Each
But who
item is
puts
weighted
that?
the same.
Right.
But who puts
Sure.
all that?
I mean, you can weight it
Right.
later if you want as a teacher, but
Somebody
completely
does.
in this scheme, it's weighted equally. To start with. All right, so that whole Socratic survey thing for possibly getting to the idea of worrying about whether or not the assessments that have been placed in this finely tuned structure of any value. I'm actually going to use one of your questions. This is something that Mike used in one of his courses. If anybody's seen my earlier talks, you may have already seen this before. So for me, a Socratic survey is something that you initially ask if you're developing this whole thing from scratch. You've got your standards, you've got it all narrowed down to one fine little point where you're using error bars for the medical section of biology. That's where we're at right now. So can anybody read this question, or should I zoom it in?
Yeah, that's good.
That's fine. So basically what it's asking is, can a student tell what these error bars mean? And that's a broad and open question, so the first thing that's done is they answer that question. Their questions fill a row. The teacher, a learning assistant, a researcher comes through, and this is one way to do it. This is the way I did it. I tried to condense what I thought were the actionable words in here. I did a first condensate all the way down. It kind of gave me an idea of what the breadth of students' answers were as I was performing this initial condensation. Then I came back through and was like, I have maybe a slightly different idea of what was the important thing to focus on. Gave it a second condensation, and then I categorized their answers. Now, you don't just want to have one person do all that categorization. So, give somebody else a blank sheet with the same questions, let them have at it. And now they've both filled this thing out. And wherever there was a disagreement, you have the title of, or the question, the answer itself, one collaborator's condensation sequence compared against another collaborator's condensation sequence with the categories they chose in the middle, which you can then decide are either exactly the same thing but one of them spelled it wrong, or they're analogous, or these are in fact two different ways of looking what was happening in the answer and move forward from there. So now, at this point, I think that it can be stated that, you've got a pretty clear picture of what these student answers mean, or at least what the field of student answers are. And from there, you then move on to the development of the Socratic part of the survey, which is providing follow-up questions or Socratic prods that are related to each specific category of student answer that's been agreed upon through constant comparison and through all sorts of different, imaginative variation, blah, 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 blah. So, you get your broad answer categories, and you zoom in a little bit further on the different categories, and you say, if one student looked at this graph, saw all these lines, saw these error bars and all this stuff, and said that they could not tell you which effects were significantly different because they'd need to run a test, right? The Socratic survey then asks them something along the lines of what would be provided by the test of your choice, which cannot be determined from the existing graph. How would you represent the result of your chosen test on the graph? Right? So we just started with this is exactly the same as the development of a partially structured interview. Right? You ask a broad question, you categorize the answers.
It's exactly the same as a structured interview. It's a lot of work for each question.
So it's a little extra work for each question, right? I mean, and that's upfront work that pays off in the long run when, after the development of the Socratic survey, which is now an automated thing, so after the Socratic survey has been developed, it still asks the initial question. After that question has been answered, students then are asked to answer related follow-up questions. What am I at here? Sorry. Terribly sorry, this is
Right, but but you could imagine then this becomes something like Alps is embedded in this, or, is that Andes, which is, this idea, or, that based on these interviews, somebody's constructed a semi-intelligent system.
Well, it's a hierarchical menu of what you ask, right?
Right.
I mean, this is the same way we do the graph analysis, which is you
Right.
know what, you sort of talk to the students enough to know if they draw the line this way, it means that
Right.
more often than not they think this.
Right.
You ask them whether they think that, tell you whether they think it or not, right?
Well, you
But I mean,
always
it's a
say in
huge
almost all
amount
these
of-
meetings,
It's a huge amount of
you
work.
talk about how do we know what that student actually means when they answered that one question? You say that you would like to do an interview follow-up in every case, at almost every meeting. And this is the same initial question,
So you
but
have
it's
to-
going to give you some
have to-
follow-up. So
but see, that question doesn't give you squat until you do the interviews about what it means, You assume you know what they mean, but you don't know until you talk to them.
for sure. So if you believe that you can't get anything out of looking at 1,000 answers to the same question and categorizing those with the eyes of several different professors or 100 professors,
There's no
Yeah.
problem in that.
then
Nobody's
there's really
arguing
no
that
point
that's
in
gonna
having any
work.
system at all. Honestly,
who's gonna
there's no
pay
point
for it.
never asking people questions.
Well, no, but it doesn't matter who's going to pay for it.
Right.
Hopefully,
Well,
hopefully NSF. But we'll see. So, I guess I'm seeing a lot of people packing up and moving along. They're really broad questions. Are there any? Is there anything you'd just love to see? Can that system do this? Have you thought of a way for that system to do this?
So I do have a question. In terms of assessing students over the course of a curriculum, when you can drill down into the syllabus or the course plan to the level that you're showing, can you also drill down per student to see how they've done in each of these? So, for example, could that graph be a student? And could it be showing, I hate to even bring up colors at this point, because we've been told not to, but could it in fact be showing an alert for an entire category of learning across different learning goals or different sections of the course or different sections of an entire science education? Could it be showing, these are the trigger points for this student to lose confidence? Or these are clearly the places where a student has gone through 3 different departments and still didn't get this thing that we think is so critical to them becoming professionals. Is that your design for this idea of being able to view student learning.
Absolutely. So in the same way that it's possible to take an assessment element and drag it and drop it inside of a specific location within your syllabus, or to take a portion of your syllabus and drag it and drop it into an assessment, in each case it cross-codes. When so as a teacher, you create this thing that's like, I have these students inside of my teaching object. When you drop an assessment inside of that object, it's applied to all of the students in there. And as those students use each assessment, those things are applied to their absolute achievement. And so within their achievement, all of the detail that was available in that AP biology exam and all of those things shows up right there for that student. And if you want to say, I just want to see, is the student having trouble with math? Right? You can look at all of the intersections of where math and anything in your course showed up and see what was going on there, see if they were getting those right or not.
See, this is exciting to me as a possibility because of the good enough student. This is the student who always bothers me, is the student who's doing well enough that you never look into what is it that's making that student not be the best student.
Sure.
Those are the ones who sort of pass through with the B+ or the A-. But what could one have done? Was there one intervention? Was there one thing that one could have done to make their career stellar as opposed to, just good enough?
Right. Well, I mean, again, I'm sure that is not anything you'll ever be able to solve by looking at what grade they got in the class. Right?
Yeah.
It's something that you can only solve by being able to look from any perspective you want at everything that's been coded related to education and what they're doing at the time.
Well, I would say there might be another way to get at it, which is asking students to self-assess. They're not always good at self-assessing, but sometimes they are. You might be able to answer the question that you're asking just by saying to the student, what is it that you think kept you from getting this?
Or even to be able to show them something like this after they have self-assessed and say, so actually, this is another way to look at it.
And again,
did you realize there's a pattern? Most students, for some reason, don't appear to appreciate that there's a pattern because they are so conditioned to think of this finite course and that finite course. So the idea that one could get them to appreciate a pattern across their career.
That's a huge part of this, especially in this student self-reporting. So what they can do there is choose, say, whether they, this is just the reporting part, but as they're going through courses, again, please see, this is not just for one class, right? This is something that I would ideally want to have for, say, all of K-12, or at least all of a university program, so that prerequisites, are placed after one course has been categorized. You grab that course element and go to the next semester and go, yep, this shows up here, this shows up there, this shows up there.
I don't believe this
I mean, like the
captures the
enduring
reality of academia. Because when some of the professor, in our department, some of the professor goes into that course, it may have little or nothing to do with what it was the previous time.
I mean,
That's
there
a
are like
problem.
only four
Well,
big ideas.
This might address the problem.
Right, demonstrates the
So this would be a way
discontinuity.
of keeping
Right.
things.
Well, this would be a way to point out the discontinuities that exist in our system.
Say,
That,
you
in
know
fact,
what? When you stop teaching this, all of the rest of this goes to hell.
or vice versa, that this is wholly unnecessary to have physics before going into biology, at least the way you're currently teaching it. Right. So, but currently we don't have any mechanism to really put that out there and share that with folks.
And I also think that this just helps students with their motivation, right? Something that I would call a legacy. So you've been asked by your teacher to do this one problem, right? Now at the point where we've coded a sequence of courses, the student can look at that one problem and say, where else am I ever going to use this again? How is this going to help me? Not just with coursework, but also with jobs. I mean, there's no reason to not consider where something is going job-wise as well. So even if it's something as simple as addition of whole numbers, right? This has a legacy. There is somewhere that this will go, and students can use this. Let's say in the sciences, it could be a lab assistant, right? Now, when they're looking at, well, it says that I learned that math, and I could be a lab assistant in the sciences. Well, what's all this other stuff? What else could I do if I learned just this little piece? Personally, I think it could be a motivating kind of factor for students to learn. I think it gives them a much clearer picture of the point of anything that they're currently learning. Keeps them on track.
So this is actually, I think, pretty related to kind of a big picture question I want to ask, which is, so my problem with GPA isn't, it's partially that I'm not sure that it's a valid measure of what students know, but my bigger problem is really what's done with it. What's actually done with GPA.
Sure.
And it's basically used as a ranking mechanism to select people out into different categories of what is supposedly ability or whatever it is, and put people into different positions and open up or close opportunities to people. And I guess my question is, in what sense is this going to make that better or possibly worse? And part of the reason I could, and don't get me wrong, I think this is a very cool system, and I think with certain tweaks and changes to inputs and outputs, it could be really useful. But it seems like, lots of people say whatever you're going to do in your job is you're going to have to learn all sorts of new things. It's going to bear some to little relevance to any specific particular thing that you learn in school. And so if somebody is hiring, say, for a particular job that they think requires particular knowledge or particular skills, and they're able to go in and filter out just those things that they think you need to know, and then find out, oh, this student doesn't know those things, and decides not to hire somebody, is that actually ignoring all the things that actually are required for that job, but that employer doesn't realize that it's not just those things that they think it is? Does that question make sense? So in a sense, this is actually enabling people to focus even more precisely on stuff that might actually be irrelevant to whether somebody can be successful. And in a way, grades are almost nice because they wash everything out.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the grades certainly do wash everything out. I think a couple of pieces here, as you're looking at students going throughout their career, you see them getting one thing right over here that a different student didn't get right, and one thing here that a different student didn't get right. And in the end, you can see all of these different paths and skills that led to the ability to do this, right? So I think it would broaden, while an employer might be like, well, I really care about just these skills, it would also allow them to say, well, what other sets of skills are something that could be utilized in this particular job? Like, if they couldn't find anybody who had that set of skills, they got to look elsewhere. And
assuming those things were measured at some point during
sure,
their
right.
education.
I mean, for this to be of any value, it needs to be pretty full.
Right. So at this point, we're gonna have a hard stop at 4:30. Right. Although I would encourage everybody in the future to consider a hard stop at 4 o'clock, a more effective strategy, because we're primates and about a 5 to 10 minutes attention span actually. So
What? Well, sweet. I really appreciate you guys showing up.
I think we should. This is a very interesting thing. What would be helpful would be a model system where you could see how it actually works.
Well,
not
or
imagine how it works, right? Because the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and I think that's part of what.
But that's only when you go straight from the frying pan into the fire. If you're an
Not
early bird.
true.
So,
There's a pot in
there's a chicken in every pot.
There's a black pot.
I would love to use this in an
And a
actual
kettle.
course. Here at
Yeah,
CU
well, so the
anytime.
question is, and maybe we can, come back and revisit this in another session. I would be very interested in thinking about what does it mean to populate this?
Right.
What would it take in order to do something like that, and how full does it have to be in order to try doing that? And so is there a domain that would be self-contained and specific enough where we could
To
try doing it?
demonstrate its efficacy
Right.
or its usefulness. I think you need a model system that will get somebody to say, okay, I get it, and I can see that it's useful. Because at this point,
It's all just.
it's
dreams.
premised on a
That's
whole
what
bunch of assessments that don't exist.
Sure.
That would cost a lot of money to build and validate.
I think
And
think
the
actually
question is
that
the
you could
real
have a model
world.
system for it would take a ton of work, but I think You know, a graduate student could certainly do this in a narrow area, say, of mechanics in introductory physics, because there's so much stuff in there. And they wouldn't be perfect assessments,
But they're there already.
but those assessments already exist, and you can
Right.
try and... Right.
I mean, following up on that, I mean, like, you guys are going to teach courses, right? Like, this was a couple of hundred pages for my AP Bio thing. There's a couple of hundred pages of outlines and syllabus that I put into the system.
Yeah.
Right? So whatever you're planning on doing for your course, give me
You've got-
a
you
day
would
and a
say
half.
you're-
I will put it into a system.
You're
Like your
assuming that I
assessments,
care
every
what's in
question
that
you
syllabus.
ask, whatever you use in the course
No,
to
but
talk
you're
through.
assuming that I believe that.
You called the hard stop.
Yeah. Hard stop. Very good, Noah. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
You'll
Okay.
be required to attend from now on.
Nicely done, Ed. Thanks.
Thank you.
Whoa.